In an offseason filled with ups and downs, twists and turns, and jaw-dropping surprises, none seemingly sits higher on that list, for me, than some of my fellow Seahawks fans' open willingness to move on from a Hall of Fame football player in the middle of their prime. And no, I'm not talking about Russell Wilson, but rather Jamal Adams. If you're to listen to some of our fellow 12s out there, they say it's time to get rid of this guy ASAP. He's no good for our Seahawks, they say. He's a bad scheme fit. He can't cover. He's going to cost far too much. They say it's time for a Jamal Adams fire sale. Well, on this Hawks Nest episode, I'm going to attempt to dispel this notion. I'm going to try to bring these naysayers, these cynics, these disbelievers back into the fold and explain why we not only have ourselves an impactful player now, but into the future, a potential Defensive Player of the Year candidate, but beyond that, and more importantly, a guy who's going to help to usher in the best defense we've seen here in Seattle since the Legion of Boom era. So let's go. How did we arrive here? I mean, when you look at Jamal Adams through the first 4 years of his career, he's made the Pro Bowl 3 times, including last year with our Seahawks. He's been named All-Pro once, which is an even more impressive award. And when you look at his addition to our Seahawks team last year, he set an NFL record with 9.5 sacks for a defensive back. So why is all not well in Seahawks land? Why is not everyone on the Jamal Adams train? Well, I think it comes down to 3 items. First and foremost, draft capital given up. I think a lot of Seahawks fans out there get caught up in what was given up for Jamal Adams, the 2 first-round picks and the 3rd-round pick. They look at that kind of compensation and they say, that's what you usually give up for a franchise quarterback, and you guys gave that up for a safety, a position which in recent years has been devalued throughout the NFL. And while these folks have a salient point to make, while that is valid, that has nothing to do with Jamal Adams' value on the football field or the type of football player he is. It's not his job to become Superman to justify the cost given up. That trade's happened. The draft capital's given up. It's built milk under the bridge. Nothing we can do about it as Seahawks fans. So we shouldn't really hold Jamal Adams accountable for that, and we really shouldn't make the judgment of his play based upon that. One does not necessarily have to do with the other. The second thing that I think really gets stuck in some people's craw is his coverage liabilities, or seemingly his coverage liabilities. Because you get these folks, and man, they speak loud and high from the top of the mountain saying Jamal Adams is so bad in coverage. And if you listen to him long enough, you would be led to believe that he's been poor in coverage throughout his NFL career and going back to college. Well, this just hasn't been the case. When you look at Jamal Adams and you look at him over the last 5 years, that includes the last 4 years and this last year in college, he's actually usually been very good in coverage, upper level in coverage. His final year in college, he was the best rated safety in coverage, actually, and he even got 5 interceptions, this being for a guy who supposedly can't catch a football. Now, his rookie year, he struggled, as rookies do tend to do, but then he hit the ground running his year 2 with an 88 grade by Pro Football Focus, which put him 4th among all safeties in the NFL, matched it up with an equivalent season the next year after that at 87.5 in coverage. Looking good. Then he comes to Seattle last year and he gets 44 as a coverage grade by Pro Football Focus, nearly half of what he had been the prior 2 years. So what's the rule of thumb with him as far as coverage goes? Is he bad at coverage, or was last year a little bit of an outlier? Well, let's see. Can we find maybe a reason as to why last year would have been an outlier for Jamal Adams in coverage? Oh, we actually can. There's 2 things that you can look at. First off, he came to this scheme, a new scheme, 180 degrees different scheme than the one he was playing with in the Jets at the 25th hour. There was no off-season. There was no Zoom meetings. There was no mini camps. There was no training camp. There was no preseason games to plan and get used to his fellow compadres. He had to get the ground running and go right from the jump and figure it out on the fly, as the coaches had to figure him out on the fly. You also then compound this upon he had his most injured season in his entire career by far. It's not even close. Jamal went through the year and had multiple broken fingers, pulled groin. Both of his shoulders, I've been given the impression here that he's had to get those operated on. I mean, that's a lot to fight through, and it's going to hold you back as a player when you're stacking up the injuries. It's hard enough to play through one injury. Now you start to add in 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's going to hold you back as well. And I think the combination of those two factors is what held him back into coverage. The third aspect and the extra aspect to this is in how the Seahawks coaches used him. You saw times in these moments that were bright, the spotlight was right on him, where Jamal Adams was asked to do something you've never really asked any strong safety to do in this scheme. You had him on Stephon Diggs in Buffalo on a key third down where Diggs made the catch on him. You had him against New England running 45, 50 yards up the field trying to cover Edelman one-on-one. You had him in the playoff game against the Rams on Cooper Kupp in a similar situation, 40, 50 yards up the field where he couldn't even raise his arms up to intercept the ball because his shoulders were so sore. The big question from my aspect is, why is a strong safety, a guy that all these naysayers is telling me is a box safety, out covering a wide receiver? Indeed, in some of these cases, the other opposition's best wide receiver 40, 50 yards down the football field. You never saw Cam Chancellor put into that type of position. It's the same type of defensive scheme, so why is he being asked to do something completely different, if not to maybe justify his cost? But Jamal Adams is not bad in coverage. And if you look at the 5 years of history, the 5 years of data, he's been upper level in coverage. Put him on running backs, put him on tight ends, as the Jets figured out how to do in year 2 and year 3, he will excel in that role and he will shut those players down. Ask him to cover the opposition's best wide receiver, he's probably going to fail. But guess what? Every other strong safety in the league will probably fail if put in that same position. The third item of discontent as it concerns Jamal Adams is cost. The naysayers say he's going to cost far too much. He's going to want to be paid $18, $19, $20 million per year because reportedly Jamal Adams sees himself as more of a de facto defensive end because of his pass rush capabilities rather than a safety, and safeties are paid far less than defensive ends are. So they say this is what he's going to cost, but we don't really know what he is truly asking for between the front office and him and where the negotiations are between those two camps. We also know that when it comes to contract negotiations, it's all about leverage, baby. Leverage. You have it or you don't. And he who has the leverage can control the negotiations for the most part. When you look at this situation right now, the Seattle Seahawks kind of have all the leverage. Right now, Jamal Adams is under contract on the 5th year of his rookie contract at about $10 million or so. You then could also franchise tag him out for additional 2 years beyond that. This would put you up about the cost of being about 3 years, $37 million if you took a hardline stance, which I'm not expecting the Seahawks to do, but they could if they wanted to take advantage of that leverage. Now, the naysayers out there say, well, then Jamal Adams will just hold out at that point. He'll just hold out if you do that to him. He's going to want to be paid, and this very well may be true. But the key on this is that if Jamal Adams forces his way out of another town, the second organization then in 3 years essentially, is there going to be then a third organization that's willing to pay him up at that $18, $19, $20 million per year cost? I don't think so. At that point, he's going to have to settle for being the next paid man up, as is what Seattle is probably offering right now. What does next man up mean? Well, when it comes to safeties, as we were talking about before, it is a little bit of a depressed market. And the way the safety market works is like this. If you're the next upper level safety to be paid, you're going to make about $500,000 more than average per year than the last guy got paid. So we look at Earl Thomas. Let's just go back a couple years on this. Earl Thomas at $13.75 million. After him, you've got the Honey Badger, who signs at $14 million average APY. Then you've got Eddie Jackson of the Bears, signs for $14.6 million. Then you have Budda Baker after that, $14.750 million. And then most recently this offseason, you've had Justin Simmons at $15.25 million. So if we were to extrapolate these numbers beyond that, what he should essentially receive, Jamal Adams, on his next contract should be a 4-year deal paying him $15.75 million per year on average, with a lot of bonus money. That is what he should be paid, and I would expect at the end of the day, that's where negotiations get and land on. But you have folks out there that are going to tell you he's going to cost $20 million, and they're just going to keep banging on that drum until their voice goes hoarse. It's incorrect nonetheless. So there you have it. Jamal Adams can't do anything about the draft capital given up for him. It has nothing to do with him as a football player or his productivity on the football field. When it comes to his abilities in coverage, he's actually been really good / sub-dominant through the course of his whole career if you look at the breadth of his whole career in coverage, especially that final year in college year where he was the best graded safety in all of college football. Then finally, cost. He's not going to cost 18. He ain't going to cost 19. He ain't going to cost $20 million. At the end of the day, Jamal Adams is going to cost $15.75 million average per year. And that's a cost I'm plenty happy to pay because you're getting a dominant defender in the middle of his prime who's going to help lead this defense to the promised land. My name is Brandon. Thank you for watching. And don't you ever forget, go Hawks.